Well, Joey, I kind of filled Fred in a little bit about what our discussion, how that kind of went the other night.
Yeah. I figured you probably would.
Well, yeah. So, and you said you were willing to meet with, him and I together.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, like the other night when we were sitting at the Chocolate Moose and I was talking about Naomi, and I told Fred that, I said, Joey started talking and he just kind of kept talking.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess if you want to, I don't want to just sit here and fire questions at you, but if you want to let Fred know how you feel or kind of what you're going through or what you and Naomi are going through and what you personally are going through, your feelings, I mean, that'd be good. And then it's coming from you and not from me.
Well, I guess maybe it'd be better if you asked me questions, any questions that you had. Because I don't know how much he told you, but I suppose I'd probably be reiterating a lot of what I already said. And Ed's probably heard a good portion of it already, so he's probably going to be boring.
No. Well, I told him, I said you and Naomi were split up or
Mm-hmm.
we're getting a divorce, unless it's already happened.
No, it hasn't happened quite yet, but it's in the works.
Right.
That's the general plan right now.
And you're still living together, though.
Yeah, she's coming back and forth between here and her parents' place, so.
Yeah.
Or her mom's place, I should probably specify that.
And then you guys are okay with dating other people?
Yeah, that we pretty much decided that, once we separated, it'd be okay if we started dating other people and moving on with our lives.
Sad to hear.
I told Ed this a little bit, but in a lot of ways, I guess I was expecting that to be the end game, but it would have been nice if that, wasn't what happened, but.
You said when we met at the Chocolate Moose that you knew shortly after you were married that you figured it would go that way.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of happened? Where did that all stem from? Do you know? Or did it just happen, or was it just incompatible, or what happened?
It was before we got married that I kind of started to figure that it wasn't going to work, but part of the reason that I got married in the first place was to just make things a little bit easier. Just, and it did, actually. It handled 99% of our problems, so I wasn't, it wasn't a bad choice. I still don't think it was a bad choice. I think it was a good choice. It's just, I understand how it's going to look to other people to see us splitting up, and, they probably wouldn't view it as a good thing. It's not a good thing, obviously, but, ultimately, I feel like her and I did pretty well, and, under the circumstances, we did pretty well.
So what was it you saw in the beginning that made you think it was not going to work?
I just knew that her and I weren't necessarily compatible, but we are still really good friends, and that made things really easy. And I don't know. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't terrible. It was just a relationship.
Well, of course, we've had lots of conversations about young Joseph Kotnick
Mm-hmm.
in the ensuing months. It seems apparent that you're, besides your marriage going the way it is, you're very unhappy with what we believe. And
I mean, some of it, not all of it. I think a lot of it's pretty benign and doesn't hurt anybody, but there's a good section of it that I think is pretty harmful. So.
So, well, you know kind of how things work. So we have to kind of, for us, it's important, that's disappointing to hear. Even if we hadn't watched you grow up and were like a son to us, to hear anybody in your situation, we want to do everything we can to help. So, we want to help you if we can, but if we can't, then we have to go in a different direction.
I mean, I understand the process. Even if I don't agree with it, I understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean...
Well, I don't agree with the government taxing me as much as they do, but that's the government's choice. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I mean, but it's also a good idea to point out abuses of power when it happens. I mean, like if, North Korea does something wrong to its citizens, those citizens leaving and talking about it isn't necessarily a bad thing. It informs the public and it informs people about what's happening. Or if a corporation or a business or anything else does the same thing and somebody decides to blow the whistle on it, I don't see that as a bad thing either. So.
Yeah, those are valid points. Depends on whether or not there's actually
An issue.
A true issue or
Mm-hmm.
not, or if it's just a disgruntled employee.
Yeah, and I mean that sometimes falls into like semantics, and everybody's arguing over whether or not somebody has a legitimate claim for, why they're complaining.
Right. It's very much like a failed marriage. It's good if you two can be friends afterwards.
Yeah.
But also know that when I hear someone accuse their former mate of all this wrongdoing and that's why we're getting divorced, I know that the former mate also has a side to their story.
Yeah. And I think that that's the general issue, is just making sure that both sides are able to be heard and not silencing one or the other. So. And I mean, ultimately, it's not uncommon for people to lie about things that have happened to them in their lives, or because they're disgruntled. But it's also not uncommon for groups that don't want to be exposed to call people who who say bad things about them liars, and so. Like I said, I guess it just depends on what evidence you have and what the issues are, and whether or not, like you said, whether or not they're valid, or if it's just somebody blowing smoke because they're angry.
Well, in every situation, there's been a couple different movies out there now, and it's based on what actually happens. There's a crossroads in the car accident.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody sees that accident from their own personal point of view, but they have no idea necessarily what has happened with all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
This guy in this car knows how the accident happened from his point of view, and this guy in this car, and everyone standing around that accident. But none of them necessarily have all the facts or information to know what's going on. And so you can come out of that accident being any one of those witnesses or participants with your own theory of what happened. And much of it might be true, but it isn't the full truth. therein lies the rub. Oftentimes, in these sorts of situations, the whole truth doesn't get to come out. So, but it sounds like you're at a point in your life where you have decided you definitely don't want to be associated with Jehovah's Witnesses.
I can't say yes because of the consequences of saying yes, but I'll just kind of acknowledge that that is, that matches my feelings, sort of. Like, you know, I know the consequences for responding affirmatively to that statement, so I'm just going to kind of, but you do understand my position, so.
Somewhat. Now, in affirmative yes, only makes certain steps. I mean, there's a no, you know, it's you saying yes just simply is you vocalizing yes to something you've been vocalizing to many people in the past months. So,
I mean, a handful, but yeah. I can count them on one hand, but I think it's 4 altogether.
You know, you talk about Joey, you know, we had a visit the other day and talked about labeling people apostates, right? Because they speak out against. And he also mentioned about people that, you know, they could just let people walk away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Leave
you know,
voluntarily without.
there's history of, there's a lot of people that have walked away. In fact, there's people in this community that have walked away, right? And they're not disfellowshipped.
many.
Yeah, they're inactive, they're not disfellowshipped.
They're technically still members, but I mean, even though they're inactive, but most of those people, I mean.
You know all these people? I mean, have you visited with them like we're visiting with you?
No.
See, there lies the problem. Now you're spreading that, and you'll put that out there and say, well, most of those people.
Well, look, okay. A lot of people who leave don't leave for the same reasons, and so you can have somebody who has been gone for 30 years but is still a firm believer. And you have somebody who's left a couple months ago and doesn't believe any of it, and you know, so whether or not somebody decides to do research into the religion after they leave versus somebody who doesn't, you know, that is usually the determining factor. And also, you know, whether or not they are afraid of the consequences.
And the collateral damage they do on the way out. Okay, so here goes somebody, they don't want to, you know, they stop coming to meetings, somebody hurt their feelings at the Kingdom Hall, whatever. I'm not going to Kingdom Hall anymore. I'm here. As opposed to somebody going out and telling this person and that person and everybody on their way out, you better start reading this, because, you know, there's a difference. You can walk away. You know, that's why I told you, I said, there's members that have walked away.
And I mean, I can appreciate that. I mean, I've considered that a lot too, and that's pretty much what I've been doing for the most part. I mean, anybody who's inquired as to my reasons for leaving, I've been honest with them, but I haven't been seeking out anyone to, you know, to tell them to go read something or look at something or anything like that. But you do understand that it is very difficult for somebody who does see the issues. I mean, we talked a little bit about, and I don't know how much Fred knows about the Australian Royal Commission and the findings there or any of that stuff. I don't know if he's researched it at all.
No, I'm not familiar with the Australian Royal
Commission. But that was...
But what I find interesting is what you're reading online and finding online.
I mean, it was broadcast like on national television,
right.
so I mean...
But we're talking about stuff that happened
as recently as September of this Yeah, last year. I mean, that was the latest update with the elder, like as far as the latest
Yeah, I know, but
letter that was put out.
But the lawsuits are from people that are adults now that were molested 20, 30 years ago.
Some of them are,
And I can tell you right now, in the stream of world history, 30 years ago, when this stuff was going on, right? Whether it was in our organization, another organization, nobody wanted to believe that it was happening, Joey. Nobody did. Nobody wanted to believe that Joey Cotton could molest this little boy, including the little boy's parents, right?
At that exact same time, the organization was publishing material bashing the Catholic Church for their problems with child abuse. And they were publishing material saying that those issues of child abuse proved conclusively that they were not, that those organizations were not directed by God. And I brought up earlier, I mean, it's been proven in court now that there was people who, were molesting children all the way up until the point where they were appointed as an elder. And yet you have claims by the organization saying, if, elders are appointed by Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So,
well,
I mean...
Okay, first of all, how was Judas appointed as one of the 12 serving Jesus?
But he wasn't the way he was before that point. What I'm saying is there was somebody molesting children all the way up until the point that he was appointed an elder and after. So he was molesting children at the point where he was appointed as an elder. It wasn't he was a good guy and then started molesting kids after.
Well, you got to understand, Jehovah only allows us to see so much.
Well,
it isn't like there's a
magic...
But
I'm talking about what the organization says.
There isn't like a magic Holy Spirit.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that's what it always falls back on is, this is what we say, but we don't really believe this. We don't really believe that everybody's appointed by Holy Spirit. It's just kind of something we say because, that it sounds great and sounds like everybody's, put in place by God, but in reality, that's not the way it works. In reality, they're not. And that, if somebody raises their hand and says, wait a second, why are we saying this if it's not true? Somebody should raise their hand and say, why are we saying this? Because it's not true.
That's the thing, though. Jehovah's organization is guided by Holy Spirit. But the problem is there are deceivers among us. There are people who...
a human can't deceive the Holy Spirit. So if somebody is truly appointed by God himself, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses claim that the Holy Spirit is God's way of interacting with the world. It's his active force. He's actually reaching into the world and manipulating it. So to say that somebody is appointed by Holy Spirit is to say that God himself is making that decision. And so when it comes out that somebody was appointed as an elder after they molested, or while they were molesting children, you can't make that claim anymore. Or at least you shouldn't be able to.
You sound like you read that right off of a chat room wall.
No,
that was posted as the top thread.
No, that's actually something that I've been, it probably sounds rehearsed because I've been going over it in my mind a lot. But
So what you're telling me and Fred is Jehovah's organization is not led by Holy Spirit. That's what you just voiced to Fred and I.
Essentially. I think that's all of the evidence points to that, and there's absolutely no evidence to the contrary.
Well, let me ask
Wait a minute. There's no evidence to the
Yes,
to the contrary.
okay. I would like to, because I would like to hear the, because I actually wrote it down. I wrote down reasons why it's the truth, and I had probably 8 reasons why people would commonly call it the truth. And it's, we're organized. Look at all of the kingdom halls that we built. Look at the literature that we've produced, which if you do look at the literature that's been produced over the last couple hundred or 140 some years, I don't think anybody could make that claim with a straight face if they've actually read everything that, things that have been said over the years.
So who could? Newsweek? People?
You don't need to, here's the thing, that's the other thing is, people will say, well, where else would you go? And it's like, well, you don't need, if you know that your bank is extorting you, stealing money from you, you don't need to have another bank set up before you leave that bank. So, I mean, and maybe there isn't another bank to go to, and maybe you just don't use a bank anymore. But identifying the fact that the bank that you are using is fraudulent or is, not the best place to be isn't that big of an issue, in my opinion. So, I mean,
like I told you for dinner the other night, you really missed out on an opportunity to actually see how it can take part in your life. Because the moment you were old enough, listen, second, Joey, I listen to you. The moment you were old enough, you use it for your marriage, whatever. You got disgruntled, just like Fred said, a disgruntled employee. Your dating situation, your courtship.
I was ready to leave before that.
I know. I'm just saying. I know you.
The only reason I stayed in as long as I did is because I got married.
Yeah. Well, let's see. You lied about dating Naomi before. She was underage. She's a minor. You lied about that.
She was 17, and that's not underage technically.
Right.
But I mean, it's underage for the organization, but that's
not necessarily. You can have her parents sign her off, and you can marry her at 16 years old if you want, right? But were you dating? Are you dating her? No.
Well, I didn't consider. Well, I mean, here's the other problem: is what Jehovah's Witnesses consider dating and what is actually dating are two different things.
Like what you're doing now.
I mean, is that? I mean, we can get into that conversation.
What do you think we consider dating that you think is not dating?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about like texting or whatever, and if you text somebody, then you're in a relationship, and it's like, if you've agreed that you're going to hold off on a relationship, but you stay in contact with somebody to find out how they're doing, and to keep up with what's going on in their lives, and
I seem to remember that that information. It isn't just texting; it's personal feelings and long text messages, and you're exclusive to that person back and forth. It's not just a text, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, we
you're manipulating what the literature actually says.
Well, I'm talking about talks that I've heard.
You're oversimplifying it.
I am oversimplifying it a little bit.
Point is,
but I'm talking about what people considered, if you guys consider us dating, or would have considered us dating, because we weren't exclusive, and we'd made it very clear that we were going to wait, and that if we found somebody else in the interim, that was completely fine. And so there was a lot to that situation where, yeah, I did feel an obligation to, be there for her, but I didn't consider that, I considered that a friendship, and I considered what started after she turned 18 as our actual courtship and dating.
All right, so what we have is our guidebook. We have one guidebook, right?
I know.
And it talks about certain things. So talking about wait beyond the bloom of youth. Okay, so that's the way they know what's the bloom of youth. Well, there's no number on the bloom of youth, but you are old enough now to realize that your feelings when you were 15 or 16 were a little more charged than even now. And that,
but you say that, and yet kids get baptized at 8 and then are held to that.
We're talking about, okay.
No, it's the same thing. I mean, it's a lifelong commitment. If you're talking about marriage versus becoming a Jehovah's Witness, it's a lifelong commitment that you're trapped in, and the only way out is to leave with your tail between your legs and maybe stay silent about things.
So now marriage is a trap.
No, I'm talking about being part of the organization as a trap.
So we have this. We have that. Wait till beyond the bloom of youth so you don't make a mistake. We're talking about marriage right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
so you're an adult. You can make a conscious decision. Like, yeah, we're going to get married. So there's that. So the admonition is to wait till you're old enough to actually be married before you start pursuing marriage and dating and all these other things, right? So we have that to go by. We talk about, where was I going to go next? you were talking about disfellowshipping when we were at dinner. You know, we're admonished in the Bible, scriptures, talks about people that are talking against the teachings in the Bible, people living an immoral life. What would you consider immoral? Sex outside of marriage. What the Bible spells out is immoral, right? It's plain. We can't argue with what's in black and white on paper. So the Bible spells out things that are immoral, right? Homosexuality, fornication, adultery. It says to cast these people out from among you. I think the Apostle Paul said that, right, Fred? So we go by that.
And what that entails is, you know, where the argument is, because when you look at the, you know, the Greek, you look at the words used, the quit mixing and company. It's used 3 times in the Bible, twice in the scriptures that you're referring to, and once in, I think it's in Thessalonians. But I mean, the scriptures in Thessalonians where the same word is used make it pretty clear that quit mixing and company does not mean completely cut someone off and refuse to talk to them. I mean, it says quit mixing in company, but continue speaking to him as a brother and encouraging him as a brother. So if you were to take the witness interpretation, how you're supposed to shun someone and refuse to talk to them at the same time is...
Well, why don't you read it to us? Second Thessalonians? Look it up. I'm willing to look it up. You don't have to just paraphrase here. I'm perfectly happy.
Yeah, it's 2 Thessalonians 3:13 through 14. It says, "For your part, brothers, do not give up doing what is right, but if anyone is not obedient to our word through this letter, keep this one marked. Stop," and it's the same Greek word, "stop mixing in company or stop associating with him, that he may become ashamed, and yet do not consider him as an enemy, but continue admonishing him as a brother."
Yeah.
And so, and I mean, that's the same Greek word that is used in Corinthians when it talks about what the congregation is supposed to do. But the other issue is that that same event, that same thing that happened in Corinthians, and this is the organization claiming this, not me, it was talked about a second time in 2 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 2, 5 through 11. And it says, "Now if anyone has cause for sadness, he is saddened, not me, but all of you to an extent. Do not be too harsh in what I say. This rebuke given by the majority is sufficient for such a man." And right there, the term rebuke, you know, that I looked that up, that's only used once in the Bible, and it's kind of hard to cross-reference that. But it says that it was given by the majority. It wasn't given by the entire congregation. And so, and the Bible doesn't specify who the majority who did not partake in that rebuke was. So, and so even if you would say, or could say, which I don't think the scriptures support, completely shunning someone and refusing to talk to them, even if you could say that that was the biblical mandate, there's obviously a minority of the congregation that wouldn't partake in that. And who is involved in that? Is it close family? Is it close friends? You know, I mean, that's part of the issue.
Here's the thing. See, the admonishing him as a brother, that's what we do when we meet with individuals, right? So
but that scripture was not speaking to just elders, and that's the problem with the organization, is they have this line that they draw. I mean, I asked you the last time if you could open the Bible and show me where it says 3 men meet secretly with someone, and then they judge that person, and then the congregation is thereafter asked to uphold that decision that these men made in secret. That process is completely man-made. It's made up by the organization because that's how they handle things, and that's not in the Bible. And unfortunately, like I brought out earlier, that process, that man-made process, has led to men being able to abuse their positions. Because, you know, maybe we don't have bad elders in this hall, but I've met plenty that are, and I know plenty of people who are. I told you a story about some who are still witnesses who have experienced that, where the elders have their good old boys club, and they have an issue with somebody, and so they're gonna show them, and all it takes is two. I mean, even if a third is in opposition to what the other two are doing, it's majority rule. So, and there's been plenty of elders who have left the organization because of situations like that. They've been on judicial committees, they've seen what's happened, and they're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I have the utmost respect for those guys, because they won't be a part of it. So the process, like I said, is man-made, and not only that, but it's able to be abused. And I think the biblical principles are pretty clear about, you have in the the Hebrew scriptures, you have examples of how, those cases were supposed to be handled. It was supposed to be handled out in the open. The judges were supposed to have the cases out in the open, and that was specifically to avoid abuses of power. The problem with Jesus' trial was that it was in secret. They took him secretly, they had his trial secretly, and then they, condemned him, and that was condemned in the Bible. So you have this long-running thing, and even Jesus, when he talks about the way to handle sins, he says, go to the person, then bring two. If he doesn't listen to them, then go to the congregation, and the congregation was to make the decision. And so you have this long-running thing where everything's supposed to be done in the open, so that people know what's happening. And
the problem there is, Joey, you have to have confidentiality for people.
Sometimes, and also
not necessarily a reason to expose anyone's mistakes every time they make one publicly.
And
that's not loving at all. It's
also not loving to have an elder decide to disfellowship you because he's trying to cover up for his kids. Or I've talked to people who the one guy, his wife cheated on him with an elder, and he was upset about it, but it went 2 years, and then finally he saw them in public, and he got mad at them and told them, this is absolutely ridiculous what you guys have done. And then that guy went and told the elders, and he ended up getting disfellowshipped for I forget, it was abusive, or something ridiculous. And that kind of stuff happens all the time. And that's not the issue. That's part of the issue. I think that's pretty decent evidence that requiring people, I brought out before that it is a disfellowshipping offense to go against the elder's decision if you're not a family member. You can be disfellowshipped for not shunning someone. If someone disassociates themselves and you continue to associate with them, you can also be in trouble, and you can also be disfellowshipped. So that puts people in a really difficult position, especially people who want to leave. And I brought out to you before, the organization had that policy all the way up until 81, that you could leave, you could disassociate yourself, and you'd be able to leave the organization voluntarily. But there's two major reasons why they changed that, in my opinion. Witnesses would say that God revealed to the organization that it needed to be changed. I would say that the organization got conclusive evidence that their claim about 1914 is completely false, and one of the governing body members left, and so they had a lot of issues, a lot of things that they needed to take care of. And so let's deal with this disassociation. If you leave voluntarily, you're also going to be shunned. We'll take care of you that way. And it's worked fairly well, except for the internet.
I'm glad you have all this worldly wisdom and have traveled the world and seen all this.
I don't need to travel the entire world to research whether or not Babylon was destroyed in 607 versus 587.
I want you to explain to me, just in what, besides just you read a book, okay, how the world came to 587, and I want you to explain to me how Jehovah's Witnesses came to 607.
Okay, I will explain.
It'll be interesting to
I
hear
will
your
I will explain the
607.
607. Okay, the 607 date starts during the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, there was a man by the name of George Bell, and he made a prediction that ever since Jesus' death, there's been tons of people who were making predictions about the end of the world. And they were trying to use the numbers in the Bible, numerology and all that stuff, or I'm using the wrong term, but they were trying to use the numbers in the Bible to predict significant events. And, most people failed. George Bell happened to hit the nail on the head. He claimed that it was a couple of years before 1799, he claimed that the Pope would be disposed or, taken out of power. And that's what happened. The French troops, because the Pope, because Catholics were causing trouble, French troops went to the Vatican. They took the Pope out of power. Everybody saw that as, oh wow, you can use the Bible to predict things that happen in real life. We've been trying to do this, it hasn't worked. Now we know we can do it. And so that spurred a huge explosion of people trying to make predictions using the numbers in the Bible. The next significant thing I would say would probably be John Aquila Brown, who was the first one to suggest that he was the first one to put forth the idea of the 2,520 years, I think, the numbers that Jehovah's Witnesses currently use to count from 607 to 1914. So he was the first one to put that forward. Then after that, you kind of had a big explosion of people trying to predict the end of the world and Armageddon and the second coming. And the biggest one was William Miller. William Miller started the Millerite movement, and he predicted that the end was going to come in 1843. So he had this huge hullabaloo where, huge portions of the country believed that the second coming was going to be in 1843. That failed. Then he moved it to 1844. That also failed. Of course, a lot of his followers said, well, Jesus did come, but he came invisibly. And so that was a huge thing. The Seventh-day Adventists, I think, still believe that Jesus' invisible presence started in 1844. So after William Miller, a lot of people left the movement. A lot of people got disgruntled. One of the people who was extremely disgruntled was Nelson Barber. Nelson Barber was a Millerite. He was extremely disgruntled about how everything happened. And so he left. He went to Australia and, for the gold rush that was down there. On his ride back, he challenged a chaplain to go systematically through the Bible and examine the biblical dates. When he did that, he thought that he had figured out the problem with William Miller's calculations. And so he said the end is going to be in 1873, I think is when he set the date for. And then, or the second coming was going to be in 1873. I wish I had memorized this better. I researched it a lot, but second coming was supposed to be in 1873. It didn't happen. They eventually pushed it up to 1878, and what ended up happening. And then he also predicted Nelson Barber basically came up with the foundation of witness beliefs. He came up with the 1914 teaching. He came up with 1844 and 1848, not 1844, 1874 and 1878, and those were the hugest cornerstones of witness teachings when it first started. Because when he started teaching all that stuff, and that's when Charles Russell joined his movement, and they kind of started their little collaboration before they had a falling out. But Charles Russell adopted all of those dates. Charles Russell said Jesus' invisible presence started in 1874, and he took the throne in heaven in 1878. And that was what he taught. And then all the way up until 1914, they were teaching that the end, like Armageddon, the end was going to be 1914. Before that, he also had several predictions. I think 1880, he said that there was going to be a rapture. That didn't happen. 1904, he said something was going to happen. It didn't happen. None of the predictions that he made for 1914 all the way up happened. He gave up on the 1914 date and switched it to 1915. And then World War I happened, and he went, oh, wait, 1914 is the right date. The Gentile times have ended. Of course, his definition of the Gentile times was a lot different, because witnesses say Gentile times was the time where there was no king on the throne of Judah. Charles Russell's Gentile times, he said that it was the fact that the Jewish people were no longer being harmed in the world. They were no longer being oppressed. And I mean, he couldn't have predicted World War II, but he said that's what the Gentile times were, and that was what the end of the Gentile times were. Then he set another date, 1915 failed. Then he set 1918, that failed. He didn't even live to see it because he died in 1916. Russell took over. He said, okay, well, he made, I think it was 10 years after 1914 that he changed Jesus taking the throne from, because it was, Jesus' invisible presence starts in 1874. He takes the throne in 1878. He moved that up and said Jesus still took the throne in 1874, but Jesus' invisible presence still happened in 1874, but he took the throne in 1914. So then he set his date for 1925. He said that was going to be the end of the world. That was the millions now living will never die. He made a whole bunch of predictions for for his beliefs as far as when the prophets would be resurrected and all of this stuff. None of that happened. But it did help the movement, quite a bit, because, a lot of people are like, oh, well, Armageddon, and that's kind of how the movement went, is prediction after prediction after prediction. The 1874 and 1878 were both dates that the organization, or at least the early people, set and failed. And so then they kind of applied significance to them in retrospect. It's the same thing they did with the 1914 teaching. And so then you had Rutherford. He went until 1942, and then he died. And they finally, after he died, they decided to move the invisible presence starting in 1874 up to 1914 as well. And then they got rid of a few other things. But,
back to my original question.
Sorry, what the whole
587 and 607.
So how do you come to those dates? Like, how do you determine them?
You read a book.
More than one, but
right.
Yes.
The worldly historians that pick that date, right?
They don't pick that date. That date's set by 17 different lines of interlocking evidence. The Neo-Babylonian period is one of the most, the best periods in human history for records.
Here's my point.
So if you're trying to lie about a date, that's the worst time period in human history, or one of the worst time periods in human history to try and lie about, because there's way too much evidence.
It doesn't have to do with lying. It has to do with, the Bible said 70 years from the time the Jews came back to Jerusalem.
The Bible said that 70 years for Babylon, and it was 70 years of rulership. It said that these nations, it was talking about all the nations that Babylon would take over, these nations will have to serve Babylon for 70 years. It wasn't just talking about the Jewish people, because the scriptures never specified that the Jewish nation would be destroyed for 70 years. It specified that the nations, all of them, would have to serve Babylon. And the destruction of those nations did start in 609, I think. And then Babylon was destroyed around 580, 587, or no, it was destroyed in, anyway, yes, 587. So, I mean, it was 70 years that they were forced to serve. I mean, the scriptures were correct. They were, the nations were forced to serve Babylon. The reason that the organization sticks to that whole, Jerusalem needed to be destroyed for 70 years is because they want to dispute the findings of, also it came from a long tradition of predictions. So, that is pretty important. The reason that the 1914 teaching is important for the organization is it's the entire authority structure of the organization is held up by it. Because they say Jesus came invisibly in 1914. They currently say that. And that, then 1919, or during that time period, he examined all religions. 1919, he selected us. But if the 1914 teaching is false, and if Jesus never came in that year, and he never did the examination, then their claims of, being selected by God, their claims of everything fall apart, which is why they don't want that information out there. And, it really wouldn't be that big of an issue for me if they were just honest and said, you know what, if you disagree with us, whatever, just go, we don't care. But when it came down to it, when that information was presented to them, and when Raymond Franz left the organization, or no, he didn't leave the organization, he left Bethel. He was later disfellowshipped for continuing to associate with a disassociated friend. But, it was the culmination of those two things, in my opinion, that led to the organization saying, we need to, curtail this. We need to handle this. So, if I had to sum it up, I'd say, aside from not wanting people to talk openly about the sex abuse and all of those things, I'd say those were probably the two biggest things that happened in the organization's history that kind of forced their hand. Or no, I shouldn't say forced their hand, because they could have said, look, we're just a couple of guys. We're not appointed by God. We are doing our best. If you want to listen to us, listen to us. If you don't, don't. That's what they could have done, but they didn't. They chose to say, if anybody challenges us, we're going to destroy their lives. We're going to take their family and friends away from them. We're going to call them mentally diseased. We're going to call them liars, deceivers, apostates. We're going to completely destroy their reputations.
What do you think the definition of apostate is?
Wow, you are full of... this almost feels like a hatred.
It's a disgust, but it's a disgust for deceit. The thing of it is I really don't know how much the governing body knows. It's kind of like a huge conversation within the ex-witness community is, are these guys really just like delusional? Have they do they really believe this stuff, or are they liars? And in my opinion, I think it's probably a decent mixture of both.
What do you think the governing body has to gain?
I've talked to plenty of people from Bethel, people who are still in, and everybody who knows, some of the governing body are great. Some of them are kind of, same with an elder, and any elder body you have some good guys, and you have some guys that just like to throw their power around.
We actually met Brother Lett.
Okay, yeah.
He came to the assembly in Bemidji.
Oh yeah, I was there. I was in the back doing I shook his hand when he walked through the door, and here's the thing. This is what Raymond Franz said. He was a member of the governing body for 10 years before he left because he couldn't do it anymore. He said that, in his opinion, a lot of the governing body of that time was sincere. And even though he noticed a carelessness about the way that they dealt with things, even though he noticed that there was a lot of authority that they kind of just threw out there with no basis, some of them were sincere. And he said that a friend talked to him and said that he said that we are victims of victims. And basically what I believe is that the organization has been able to perpetuate lies for a very long time because, one, you can just silence anybody who says anything. And two, I mean, I told you I talked to, the circuit overseer, Brother Bruce. I talked to him, and when I brought this stuff up to him before Naomi and I got married, he said, who knows about this stuff? Who really even care? His response to me was, I was convinced at the time that the reason they were keeping these teachings around was because they were worried that people would lose the faith and leave. And his response to me was, well, nobody even knows this stuff. Nobody even cares about this stuff. So, why, that's not the reason that they would keep it around. And I've changed my opinion on that. Now I know that like I said, it's the sole basis for their claim of being selected by God. And they, it was their prize horse until it proved false. And like I said, they kind of painted themselves into a corner because they really didn't have much of an option, because once it was proven false, which even if it had been accurate, and even if Jerusalem had been destroyed in 607, it still wouldn't have proved that they were selected by God. It would have just proved their chronology, or it would have said that there was some basis to their chronology. Wouldn't have proved that it was Bible-based or anything like that. But, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. They did have a choice. They could have chosen to be honest, and they didn't. And people like myself are suffering the consequences even now, because when we stand up and say, wait a minute, you don't have any basis for claiming to be selected by God, you're just a couple of guys, and quite frankly, I'm not going to risk my life, I'm not going to risk my family's life, I'm not going to shun my family for disagreeing with you, I'm going to be...
None of your family disagrees right now. Just you.
Well,
just you, Joey.
I have risking lives. There's no risk of life here.
If you refuse medical treatment, for 10 years they taught that organ transplants were cannibalism, and several witnesses died because of following that admonition. And then they changed it, and they're like, "Where's the apology?" "Oh, sorry, dude, you died because you refused the kidney transplant."
Because of Jehovah's Witnesses, bloodless surgery is a huge thing in this country.
Its
benefits are astronomical.
And yet there's no other substance that can substitute blood when it comes to trauma at the moment. And as soon as science figures that out, the issue with blood will be fine. But science hasn't figured that out yet.
90% of the problems when it comes to blood loss is volume. And for the most part, you can keep someone alive by keeping the volume there. We basically become a flat tire. There's actually bloodless hospitals now.
I'm aware of that.
There's a major one down in Texas that was just in the newspaper. It was a front page article
and I still think that it should be a choice. And right now it's classified as a disassociation action. Used to be disfellowshipping action until the organization tried getting registered as an official religion in Belgium. I think it was Belgium. Don't quote me on that. I think it was Belgium, and then the Belgian government, said, well, we disagree with this one thing. You shouldn't disfellowship people for taking blood transfusion. And they said, okay, we'll change that. And they just moved it over to being a disassociation offense. So it's the same thing, the same treatment, same everything. It's just one, transfer hands. Personally, I feel like that was extremely deceptive. But, the Belgian government didn't know anything about the way witnesses operate. They didn't understand that. So, of course that was fine. But, that's my general issue is I've talked to several people, especially people who have had to keep their feelings about the organization secret. When you haven't told your husband or wife that you don't believe, and then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're you're in a hospital and there's 3 elders and your wife, and you're like, I don't agree with this, but I certainly can't make a decision on my own. And I'm not saying that everybody's like that, because I've talked to plenty of people who are extremely grateful for having 3 elders by their side, or however many elders they're watching. But at the same time, when you have people who disagree and aren't allowed to voice that disagreement, they're put in a really difficult position. And so, it would take a simple, this is no longer a disfellowshipping offense, or, use your conscience, whatever. We will still support you. We'll still have the liaison committee. We'll still have everything, but we will not punish you for making that decision.
So it'll just be the Catholic Church. Just do whatever you want. We'll take all comers. We'll just want your money. We don't care.
The organization seemed to operate pretty well all the way up until 81, doing what it was doing. So,
there was people disgruntled before 81, Joey. In fact, as well
because
as I, you've read enough to know
I've read the books.
Massive exodus before 81.
It was 75 because of the false predictions about the end of the world then, which, I've read plenty into that. And, that was another one. It was, Jehovah's Witnesses, I think, in total, I've counted 10 false predictions for either the end of the world, a rapture, or Armageddon.
I've never actually read anything that said 1975 was...
Yeah, what they said was 1975 was the end of 6,000 years of human existence. Supposedly, they had calculated, and you weren't allowed to challenge this either because that's apostasy, but supposedly they had calculated that Adam and Eve were born at a certain point, and that 1975 was going to mark 6,000 years of human existence on the earth. Their claim was that their most affirmative claim, they had made several predictions for the end is coming, the end is coming, the end is close, only a few more years. I think it was 1968 they put out an article about higher education and how you shouldn't pursue higher education because the end would come before you had a chance to finish your schooling, things like that. And then the most affirmative affirmative thing that they put out was that they said that it would be in accordance with God's purposes that He make the beginning of the end start at, I don't want to misquote it, but it would be, I might have it saved on here. Yeah, it would not be by mere, here's some of the quotes. This isn't the one I was looking for. It talked about 6,000 years from man's creation will end in 1975, and the 7th period of the 1,000 years of human history will begin in the fall of 1975. So it's not many years within our own generation we are reaching what Jehovah could view as the 7th day of man's existence. How appropriate it would be for God to make this coming 7th period 1,000 years, a Sabbath period of rest and release, a jubilee, and it goes on. It would be most timely for mankind. It would also be more fitting on God's part. For remember, mankind has yet ahead of it what the last book of the Holy Bible speaks of as the reign of Jesus Christ. It would not be by mere chance or accident, but would be according to the loving purpose of God for the reign of Jesus Christ, the Lord of the Sabbath, to run parallel with the 7th millennium of man's existence. So, claiming that something is going to be in accordance with God's purposes if He makes that happen, that was the most affirmative thing. And they were also recommending, or they were praising people for selling their homes. There was an article that said that reports have been or are heard of those selling their homes and engaging in a full-time ministry in the short amount of time that's left. Truly this is a praiseworthy thing. Or, it's like there was tons of that stuff all the way up until 75, and that was actually when Raymond Franz was part of the governing body from, I think it was 71 to 80, a little after 80, or from 70 to 80. But he was a part of the governing body for that entire period.
I actually saw Brother Franz give a talk at a convention.
Ray Franz or Fred Franz?
The older one.
Fred, that's his uncle.
Yep. I just lived with Ike.
Yeah. Yeah, Ray Franz died in 2010.
Yeah.
So
Ray Franz is this Franz you keep talking about.
yeah, Ray Franz is the one who left the governing body in 1980. He was later disfellowshipped for continuing to associate with a friend of his who had disassociated before the organization changed the policy on disassociation. So he disassociated when technically disassociation was just, you just became a worldly person. But he disassociated before that point, and then after that point, he continued, or Raymond Franz, after they made that change, Ray Franz continued to associate with them, and he was eventually disfellowshipped. So that's what happened with him.
I'm going to change this topic here a little
Okay.
bit, Joey, and ask you something. I'm just going to come right out and say it. Are you living with another girl? Or are you dating somebody right now that's spending a lot of time at your apartment?
I am dating someone else, yes.
How old is she?
19.
She's just a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay. You said you've seen them all in public and brought
I'm assuming that was the one in the attractive one in your group.
That's kind of insulting to my other friends. The one that wasn't bad.
Okay, the one in the fishnet stockings or whatever it was she was wearing.
I'm not sure if that would have been the same, because
Short, dark hair.
well, I know I have two short, dark-haired friends, and the other one is the one that usually wears the stockings. So it might be a different person that you're thinking of. But yes, I am dating someone else.
I saw you with this group of people, and then afterwards, someone mentioned that they thought you were dating someone. And I was like, oh, I might have seen this person.
I mean,
But that's actually, I only saw like you and two other people. So
I'm not sure if she was. I couldn't tell you, but because we had a decent group of people with us at that point, and we were like grabbing stuff. We were just about to leave for camping, so like I was like trying to get a whole bunch of food ready and stuff like that.
I have to admit, Joey, the amount of time that you have spent trying to prove that anything wrong is
I tried to.
impressive.
It was me trying to prove it right, and I failed miserably. That's what it was. It wasn't me trying to prove it wrong.
It's unfortunate because thankfully I have not run into any of these types of things that you have talked about bad elders and people. Well, I can't say that. Jehovah's organization is full of imperfect men, and imperfect men are sometimes selfish. They, did have things happen, like you've said, where guys have done bad stuff to get at other people or whatever, certainly.
And also families come into play, and then then all of a sudden you're wanting to protect your family.
Yeah, I mean,
You're getting into.
I've talked.
Is there all sorts of imperfection? Certainly.
I've talked to like women who were beaten by their husbands and they decided to leave their husbands, and technically you're supposed to be able to divorce your husband, but this kid was an elder's son, and they threw the book at her because she left him and they didn't agree with it, and but the thing of it is it's not like, oh, this is just isolated stuff. This is like thousands and thousands of stories of people who have suffered the same stuff. And it's all the same kind of stories. It was all these elders, they did this, or somebody at Bethel. I was at Bethel for how many years until I started realizing this isn't anything like what people say. I've talked to a few people, even people who are still in, who have really interesting stories about their time at Bethel and some of the stuff that they saw, and it would be, like I said, it would be absolutely fine if it was voluntary. If you could say, okay, I've seen too much, I don't believe this anymore, I'm leaving, and here's the reasons why. Somebody wants to talk to me about why, you know what I mean? But unfortunately, the best that you can hope for is maybe a vow of silence, where you leave and you're basically forced to not say anything. Maybe you get away, maybe you don't. But, I mean, I've talked to people who were gone for 5-6 years, and they find out that they were, you know, their mom calls them or something and says, "You were disfellowshipped tonight." And they're like, "Oh, what the heck?" You know what I mean? And usually the elders are supposed to reach out to you, but, you know, sometimes they send a letter, and if you don't respond to that letter, then they have the case in your absence. So, you know, if somebody moves, or if the elders don't know where you're currently living, send a letter, and then they, you know, they don't get a hold of you, and then
The
they
letter
dismiss.
sent, certified, signed, signature, you know,
Yeah.
back from the post office, yes, I handed this letter to this person. It's not just mail a letter and, oh, we never heard back.
Well,
I mean, it's outlined specifically what you're supposed to do in those cases when someone's, you know, specifically trying to avoid you.
I mean, I've read, like, you probably won't like this, but I've read the entire Elders book. I know what it says. So, I mean, Jamie was actually the one who told me that it was online, but
It's not like that was a secret.
no, I mean, obviously everything gets leaked.
Okay, so
but
here's the nuts and bolts of it, Joey. Fred and I are elders in this congregation. Okay?
I'm aware of that.
So we are, and we, obviously it's in our heart. What you're, like I said the other day, what you're believing is obviously you've got that entrenched in your heart. What we believe is in our heart, okay? So we have a procedure to follow. Fred and I do. Whether you agree with the procedure or not.
It's just
We have
it's just a perfect example of what I was saying. There's no, it's, you know, fault. Well, here, I want to read something real quick.
I don't need to hear you read anything. In fact, I don't want you to read anything because we've let you talk for hours to me and to Fred. And you know, you try to, you know, it's one of those things like if I'm going to examine Joey's life and I'm going to find everything wrong in Joey's life and I'm going to expose it all. Like I'm going to find little, you know, your marriage, this, what went wrong, everything. I'm just going to examine that and it's going to be my entire focus in my life.
What went wrong is that I allowed myself to be manipulated by people who had a lot of power over me and who threatened me directly.
I thought you wanted to get married.
I didn't, actually. I think I made that clear when I talked to you before.
But I seem to remember a lot of the people here telling you, you know, why don't you wait?
We really didn't have much of a choice. I mean...
Was she pregnant?
No, she was not pregnant.
Okay.
Joey, everyone here has cared about you from the get-go, since you were the time you were a small child. Okay?
People's feelings don't make this religion true.
That's true.
That's the problem.
when it came to you and your now about to be former wife, we were looking at it from the outside without being emotionally invested, and we were all going, this is a bad idea. We thought you guys were making a mistake. We wanted you guys to slow down. We wanted you to wait. And you know what? If you two can go your separate ways and maintain a friendship, that's great. But unfortunately, Joey, that is very rare. You are, if you manage to do this, you would only be the second divorced man I've ever met who has a positive relationship with his ex-wife. Oftentimes, that destroys lives. And thank goodness you don't have children.
If we had children, the equation would have changed quite a bit, and we probably wouldn't be getting divorced. So, I mean,
but
I went into it pretty much knowing that we were eventually probably going to split up. But
and we were afraid that was going to be the outcome too, and we're trying to get you not to make that mistake.
But the way that you decided to try and not make that mistake is saying, okay, we're going to micromanage your courtship. We're going to threaten you with judicial action if you don't follow our rules that we got together and made up. And, you know, and beyond that, I mean, just the simple math of it, we couldn't afford 2 places. So, and, you know, it makes it a lot simpler if you just take all this stuff out of it and I just go up to Naomi and say, you want to move in with me for a little while? You can get on your feet. You can get things situated, and we can, when everything's said and done, we can part ways. I mean, that could have been incredibly easy, but because of the legalistic approach that this organization has, not to mention the fact that, anyway, things would have been a lot easier if we were able to just operate on our own without having to deal with all of that stuff. And that would have made my life...
Why did she have to live with you, or...
Well,
to
just
get
the
on her-
situation with
get
her
on her
parents or
feet?
something like that.
I mean,
Something weird happened.
her situation with her parents is a lot better now, but they were in the middle of a divorce. The guy that her mom was with moved in, and it became a situation where going back really wasn't much of an option. And quite frankly, I saw getting married as and I want to make it clear that that's not why I'm upset. Because had everything still happened the same way and this religion was true, I'd still be part of it. But I had already come to the conclusion that it was false before any of that happened. Me going through all of the stuff with you guys was pretty much me going, okay, I have to play the part, I have to play the game because that's my only option. Either that or, I was thinking of leaving before that point, but I didn't want to. Naomi was still a firm believer at that point, and so she would have been left with, anyway. There's a lot going on in my head right now, but you do understand that that's not the reason. Like I had already decided, no, this isn't true. No, I don't want to be part of it. And I knew that, and I told you and Jamie when you came and talked to me that I would have stepped down as a ministerial servant if I thought I could. But I knew what impression that would give to people in the congregation, especially if, like Jamie said, you guys pursued judicial action. So, everybody would make their assumptions whether or not anything happened or not. And so I knew that there was really no good way around that. I couldn't keep a chaperone indefinitely. I thank you for offering to have Tia, but you know what I mean? I couldn't do that forever. I could barely do it as long as I did with Thomas. And like I said, we just couldn't afford two places, and it was the thing of it is it was an easy decision. It was an extremely difficult decision, but it was the logical decision. We made it. Now we're parting ways. We are still very good friends. This hasn't destroyed our relationship. I meet with her quite regularly. We talk, we laugh, we have a great friendship, a great relationship, and in all things considered, I think it went extremely well. And so I did what I thought I had to do, and that's all I have to say. But okay, I devoted my life to the organization. I spent a lot of time in the ministry. I truly cared about whether or not it was true. I still care. I can say for myself, you might not agree with me, but I can say that I have 100% certainty that it is not. It's not true in the way that they claim, at least. Having a handful of doctrines that might be a little bit more accurate than other religions, on top of having all of the other issues, isn't good enough for me. And I should be able to say it's not good enough for me and explain to other people why I feel it's not good enough. And that's where, that's pretty much the gist of it. So, and I also hate that the organization paints people who leave as just these bitter, evil people, when in reality I've met and spoken to many of them, and they're very kind, very considerate, very caring people. They were witnesses at one point. It's not like they just became different people once they left. A lot of, and not everybody left for the same reasons. Maybe somebody left because, they got in trouble for having sex or something, and then they leave and they read Raymond Franz's book, or they read Gentile times reconsidered, or something like that, and they go, oh wow, well, I'm not going back because this isn't true. So now they're in a position where they're like, they really don't have very many options as far as, the organization says you have to come back if you want to see your family again. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who haven't spoken to their family in 10, 20 years because of the policies of the organization. So, and it's a simple policy change. Just say, if someone chooses to leave voluntarily, they no longer want to be part of it. This person is now a worldly person, and they should be treated as such. Like I said, that's how it was before the 80s. And
Well, part of the problem there is, of course, I have not been on any chat rooms with ones who've left this organization.
I mean, it's not just chat rooms. I mean, I've talked to people.
Run into, without trying to, on the internet over the years, multiple different apostate sites, different people saying stuff, and it's always a very negative, attacking type situation.
And I'm just going to say,
I'm glad you can tell me some of these are actually nice, polite people.
That's the thing, is that's all I encountered when I was 15, 16. I started going online, and that's all I encountered. And I went, wow, these people are exactly what the organization says they are. And of course, those were the only people that I ever found. I didn't realize, I didn't even know about Ray Franz's book. When that was written, that was probably the biggest thing for a lot of people. But personally, that's not the biggest thing for me. For me, it was the 1914 teaching, because in my mind, if you're claiming if you're claiming that you were chosen by God, you have to be chosen by God. You know what I mean? You have to have a time when you were chosen, and so, like I said, the organization put all their eggs in one basket. They banked on the 1914 teaching for a really long time without making sure that it was sound. And it's good that it was found out that it wasn't sound.
We're getting way off track.
I gotta go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm having to go to the bathroom too. But
I'm sorry.
the problem here is, you keep mentioning just going away. Yeah, like we said, lots of people have. The problem is, you got to remember. So you've read our book, so you know what is our job as elders. We have two jobs here. Two jobs. What's our two jobs?
Essentially, what the book, I believe, says is that they're supposed to shepherd the flock, as in provide spiritual care and direction. If there's an issue, somebody's sick or something, provide them encouragement. And also speak in front of the congregation and give talks and stuff like that. And then also to handle issues where there's, I'm just going to put wrongdoing in air quotes just because I don't always agree with what the organization defines as wrongdoing, but to handle wrongdoing.
Okay.
So.
Pretty much. Okay. So we're modeled after an actual real shepherd. He cares for the sheep, right? What's the second thing he does? He cares for them, makes sure they get food, water. What else does he do for the flock?
I'm assuming that the direction you're going is that they protect the flock from predators.
Right. Okay. So the rub here is that it's not about someone just going away. They disagree with the. It could be as simple as, you know what? I believe I should be able to have sex with as many people as I want, or sex with a man. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to be part of this organization. Or I really think that doing drugs is okay for me, and I want to do drugs. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to be part of this organization. Or even like you have now decided you don't agree with that this is God's organization, so you don't want to be a part of it anymore. Well, the problem is, it isn't just people going away. There's a lot of people out there who want to be a Pied Piper.
But I told Ed this before, but that's exactly what Jehovah's Witnesses do. They'll leave being a Catholic, and then they'll tell all of their friends and family about the information that they found and this wonderful religion that they found and they enjoy. It's like, but when the shoe's on the other foot, and somebody who leaves the witnesses comes back and says, "Hey, did you guys know about this stuff?" There's all of a sudden this huge, all these consequences for them. Whereas I feel like the organization, if they truly believed they had the truth, would be willing to have those conversations and would be willing to have that information out there and address it rather than just sidestep it and punish people who bring it up.
Well,
I know you don't know much about what I'm talking about.
I can't prove either way. I can't prove any of the stuff that, I have read much of the information that you've read. I haven't read any of these books or anything, but just over the years run across this stuff. But because of all the good I know that this organization does around the world, I don't agree with this not being God's organization because I know all the good stuff,
But
all the positives.
that's the other thing is that even if it was only positives, that wouldn't prove that it's God's organization. That's the problem. Is that even if there wasn't the child abuse issues, even if it wasn't,
There's only one way to prove that this is God's organization. The Bible only gives one proof. Jesus only said there would be one way that people would know God's organization.
and I'm assuming you're talking about having love amongst yourselves, which I will say then this organization fails completely. You're going to shun your family for simply disagreeing with the governing body. You have completely...
But also Jesus said you'd lose your brother for what you believe.
Yes, because your brother would shun you, not because you would shun your brother. Jesus was talking about the consequences of becoming a Christian, that the Jewish people would start shunning them because he knew that they would lose their families as a consequence for taking that stand.
So you want a big rubber stamp on the Kingdom Hall door, right? Jehovah's finger's going to come and he's going to put a mark on the organization and say this is it.
I mean, if you're asking me to shun my family, then yes, you have to have 100% success rate as far as things that you've said in the past, and you have to have clear proof that you're selected by God. Otherwise, no, I'm not breaking off ties with my friends and family over arbitrary teachings and things that you've made up because you are worried that you're going to lose your claim to being selected by God.
See, what I see is that you're not breaking off ties with your family because of arbitrary teachings. You're breaking off ties with your family because you've chosen to disagree with what your family believes, and you're making that choice knowing what the consequences are. And I told you before, Fred and I, we have to handle this in a certain way. So, and when I told you at the chocolate mousse, before, and you said you were ready to meet with two of us, in your mind, you're probably preparing yourself for what could possibly potentially happen.
I mean, at this point, there's two witnesses, so technically, I mean, you guys could disfellowship me without me even being there.
There's more than two.
I mean, yeah, I suppose you guys had.
There's more than two. And
I mean, technically, when I talked to Seth and Andrew, I didn't say anything about the organization. Actually, all I did was draw parallels. I didn't even talk about the organization. I just talked about other groups that do the exact same thing and asked them, why do you think these groups do that? Why does the exclusive brethren shun people who leave and who try and speak out? Why do Scientologists do that? Why do the Moonies do that? Why do all of these groups follow these same patterns?
I just read about a college in Ohio where you can't touch anyone at all, even to say, how are you doing, without asking first, and you're not allowed to have a drunk hookup. And if you do, if the other person is drunk and you hook up with them, you can get shunned for that. And actually, they interviewed one of the people who goes by we, us, them, and they had been shunned. And they went to a party that a bunch of people from the college were at. And the people at the college said, "What are you doing here? You got kicked out of the college." And they're like, "We have the right to be here at this party. It's a public place." And they're like, "No, this is all people from the college you've been shunned from. You know, if you can't follow the rules, we don't want you around us."
I'm kind of missing the point. Like, that sounds like a reason why you, like, that college isn't a good thing. Like, my response to that would be, obviously that college is engaging in some manipulative behavior, and either way...
Well, what it is they have a set of rules. And you go into it knowing the set of rules, and this person, it's an interesting story, you know, I got to see both parts. This person had their version of what they feel happened and why they shouldn't have been shunned, but yet the others in the college felt that they had broken the rules, and because of that they were out. And it wasn't just that they were out of being on campus, they didn't want them around at gatherings outside of the campus. You know, they were out, and they wanted them to...
My prediction for that college is that that type of environment is going to quickly lead to a lot of abuse very, very fast. I mean, that's my prediction. I'm planting a flag right here and saying that it's going to lead to a lot of abuse, a lot of censorship, a lot of ideas being silenced because people simply don't like them. And that's exactly the point, is you're not going to find truth in an environment like that. And you're probably going to just create an echo chamber, and that's what that college is going to become, is an echo chamber in which they just keep perpetuating the same old crap, and they don't allow anybody to refute them. And so like I said, I'm planting a flag right here and saying that's my prediction. We'll see in 5-10 years what it turns into, and if they don't change their policies, that's my guess, is that's what it's going to become.
I mentioned to Fred, when we were talking the other day, and I asked you if you're a Christian, and you said no.
I would define myself as an atheist.
Yeah.
Most people when someone says atheist, they don't really understand what the term is.
Agnostic or atheist?
Agnostic has to do with knowledge. Atheist has to do with accepting claims. So I have never heard a theist, the claims of a theist God that I have accepted. So I am an atheist. I am also agnostic because I do not believe that we can know that an immaterial, spaceless, timeless being exists. So that's my position on that.
So you would say you're atheist. You don't believe God exists.
I do not.
Okay. That's really sad.
I don't think it is.
You just accept the fact that all over this world, there's been so many billions of children who were born, lived the most terrible existence possible for sometimes only a matter of months or a few years, and died.
And that's all there is. Yes.
So guys like if we don't take what we can out of this world, there's nothing. I guess
you could say. I mean, I didn't say that being an atheist is a great thing, and I didn't make the claim that it leads to happy joy, and you know what I mean. Like, I'm just saying I don't believe that there's a God.
You're just going to exist until you die, then also. I believe,
as far as the evidence that I've seen, I believe that is the case.
So if you're right, you die, and if you're wrong, you die.
If I'm wrong about there being a God, I'm 100% certain that this isn't the right religion. But if I'm wrong about there being a God, then that'll be very interesting. And I refuse to believe that the Jehovah's Witness version of a God who's going to genocidally murder 99% of the population for not being a Jehovah's Witness, I don't believe that that God exists. Is there another type of God? Perhaps. I mean, but I don't know that. And that would be, like I said, that would be very interesting.
Actually, if you examine every religion, you either have to be part of that religion or you're going to get destroyed.
That's why religion in general is a very manipulative group.
You can't just say Jehovah's Witness and everyone else is going to die. Well,
that's not necessarily the case. There's plenty of religions there's plenty of Christian religions that believe that, God will examine your conscience. I think is it Philippians 2 or Romans 2 that talks about the people who do by nature the things of the law are a lot of themselves, and that God will judge them based on their conscience, and they'll be excused or accused or excused. I would be willing to, that's what I would believe a loving God, how a loving God would operate. It's based on the consciences of people and based on, what he knows to be in their hearts. He or she, God obviously wouldn't have sex, but you know what I mean. But I
wish you I'm planting a flag, as you said, and I'm going to say your next several years, 5 years, 10 years, are going to be an interesting ride for you. It comes to a point where your mind, you change your mind. You've got different feelings. Let us know, right? You change your mind, something, because even if you were to disassociate yourself, Joey, that's not a final. It's not. I wrote a letter, so you never return. It's not an end game. It's not. I know you said nobody ever returns. Well,
no,
that's not necessarily true.
No, that's not true. Plenty of people return. It's what are the reasons why they return?
Yeah.
Maybe something bad happens in their life, and that's they've.
Some people reflect and they say there's got to be more than just living and dying in this miserable existence we have.
And you know what? I understand that, and that's part of the reason why I have such an issue with the organization is that
there's a reason why Christianity. I'm not just talking about just Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm talking about Christianity. Why there's so many followers around the world?
Because it offers hope. It offers hope for the future. It offers an end game. It offers the belief that we will live on after our deaths. And that is an extremely desirable thing. Everybody wants to live forever.
But
everybody wants to live on.
It's not just Christianity, that's pretty much all religions.
Pretty much all religions, except for maybe Buddhism. They believe that, something about you eventually don't exist, and that's the ultimate goal or something like that.
Once you're around long enough, you'll realize that making money and just living your life is empty.
I already know that, and I hope that you don't think that that's what I think life is about.
But it scares me to make me nervous that you're taking this path. Like, where do I find happiness? Do I find happiness in trying to discredit this religion? Is that where I'm going to try to find happiness?
I won't find happiness, and I've heard some people say that it's a little cathartic at first, and then it, some people just fizzle out because they don't enjoy it. I don't see much point in me spending all of my time, I will talk to people. I will, if anybody inquires as to why, and I won't shy away from pointing out the failures of the organization. The ultimate goal, obviously, isn't to say, they're bad. The ultimate goal is to force them into a corner and make them change their policies, which is what happened with the Australian Royal Commission. That's why they changed the policies that they did. All of those policies in the August letter were a direct result of the Australian Royal Commission and the recommendations that they made to the organization. They said, these you have to change. And they changed most of them. They still keep the 2-witness rule, and they still don't report to authorities if there's not mandatory reporting. Those are the two bigger issues that I see that they could change in their policies to make it better. But for right now, I'm glad that they changed the policies that they did. And like I said, that was because their feet were held to the fire. They were exposed on national television, right after Stephen Lett came out and said, the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive towards pedophiles. And then right after, they have this huge commission that shows that, they didn't report, over, 1,008 or 1,006 abusers, 1,800 victims. It's like, yeah, this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and people who are coming forward and saying, I was abused and the organization covered it up, they're not apostates. They're people who are, the organization calls them apostates, but they're victims and they need to be, listened to. And Jeffrey Jackson was actually called out on that. And Angus Stewart, the attorney, said, do you acknowledge that people who are trying to highlight these issues are doing so, you understand that this commission is not out to get you. We're doing this because we honestly want to protect the children. And he said that, yes, I acknowledge that. And he said, well, then do you disagree with anyone who would say that, those who are highlighting these issues are engaging in apostate-driven lies? And he sidestepped the issue and was like, well, it depends on whether or not the charges are accurate and all this stuff. And it's like, well, Stephen Lett should have went on and said, we do believe that some people are saying things that aren't true. There are some cases of child abuse. We're going to change our policies to address these things. And instead, he just said, it's just all lies, apostate-driven lies. And it's like, okay, that doesn't help anyone. That doesn't protect kids. That doesn't do anything. I mean, like I said, they had to have their feet held to the fire before they did a damn thing.
What do you think was man, you got... I've heard all I need to know, but...
Sorry, I'm sure you've
You're
heard...
really stuck on this child abuse thing.
I am really... I'm stuck on it because they've been calling people liars for decades, and you have the videos, you have the stuff that people has put out, you've had the documentaries that have been on the news, you have all of those things, so you can go back and look at what those people said were happening, then you can see the organizations say that they were liars, and then you can see them exposed on national television and see that all these things that those people were saying were 100% true.
Well,
so
I'm not ever aware of anyone trying to actually cover up a pedophile.
There have been cases where somebody was removed as an elder and disfellowshipped, and then brought back into the organization and reappointed. They sent, elders moved, and they sent a glowing recommendation letter and didn't inform the other elders that he was a pedophile and he abused more kids in that congregation. There's plenty of cases where, you can call it what you will as far as covering up, but when they're like, oh well, we don't want to drag Jehovah's name in the mud, and we don't want to bring reproach on Jehovah, and so they encourage people not to go to the police, or they say you don't want to bring reproach on Jehovah. Maybe they don't say don't go to the cops, but they'll mention something like that. That was one of the cases in the Australian Royal Commission where the elder admitted to telling the girl that when she was going to go to the police. And then beyond that, the fact that when you don't report, even if you do disfellowship somebody, nobody in the congregation knows why they were disfellowshipped, and it doesn't help any of the kids who are either still living with that person or who are in the general public. I do care about kids that aren't Jehovah's Witness children. And so, these guys who are just, even if you cast them out of even if that was the argument, oh, we cast them out of the congregation. Okay, for how long? When did they get reinstated? Does anybody know what they've done? Still in the material, the latest letter I read, it said that they could receive privileges again. It said that, it may be some time, if ever, if they were to receive privileges. And I'm glad that it says that instead of what it used to say, which is it cannot be said that somebody who's engaged in this can never be appointed or whatever, but still, it leaves the option open. And so, that I guess that would be the third one, is if somebody is engaged in pedophilia, immediately, they also didn't say remove anybody who was a pedophile from being an elder at this point. anybody who's currently an elder who's engaged in those things, immediately remove them as an elder. That would be another recommendation that I would say, is just, don't ever let them receive privileges and remove them from elders right now.
This is going to sound wrong, and this is going to sound really bad. I don't like pedophiles, I'm not promoting pedophiles, but I'm going to tell you what this happens in the real world. You've probably heard of this yourself. In fact, I'm aware of, I think, 2 guys that this happened to. Disgruntled wife or girlfriend says, Joe touched Johnny, right? The guy is ruined. I mean, he is drugged through the mud. And this is the court system, mind you, the police system.
I'm aware.
And it's all over. And then all of a sudden it comes out later, well, no, the charges are dropped. It was false. It's like, oh my word. But the guy's ruined. Like, he's a pedophile forever. Just because of a ticked off wife or a woman.
Let the police handle it. I don't trust the organization as far as I can throw it.
Well, I don't trust the police.
I mean, that's what it boils down to. Is the organization is like, sure, you can come up with examples of somebody who says, "Oh, I had a great experience with," not a great experience with being molested, obviously, but a great experience with the elders. They handled it well. They reported to the police, and a lot of those cases are in the mandatory reporting areas. I don't understand why the organization can't just expand that and say you report no matter what, whether you're in a mandatory reporting area or not. And there are no legal consequences for reporting child abuse. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses, up until recently, weren't defined and didn't define themselves as clergy, so there's no clergy privilege. They don't have to keep any of those things secret. So legally, they would be free to report to the police. Unfortunately, there was just an elder not too long ago who did that very thing. He reported to the police when he wasn't in a mandatory reporting area, and the organization removed him as an elder. And there was another example where a guy leaked documents about child abuse, and he was disfellowshipped. So, I mean, and the thing of it is, like I said, it would be solved very simply if they just said, if you do not want to be a member, you can leave voluntarily with no consequences. Because the second you say you can leave, but you have to remain silent, and if you don't, we're going to take your family away, then it becomes extremely manipulative.
Well, like I said, I know people that have left. My brother left. And he's not Christian. He doesn't take part in anything. I talk to him occasionally. Topic of religion doesn't come up. He doesn't talk about being a witness. And it's not because he can't. It's just because he's gone. Like, it's not his life. It's not his life. He was baptized. He left.
And some people look at it in different ways. And like I said, some of the ex-witnesses that I've talked to, some of them were out for over 30 years, and they said, I just now looked into the religion. I've been afraid that I was going to die at Armageddon for the last 30 years, and I just now looked into it and went, wow, this is ridiculous. And so, it all depends on the reason why somebody left and whether or not they educate themselves after they leave. Because, if you don't educate yourself, you're still a believer whether or not you're in the organization or not. And your brother might not be a believer, but he might not know anything. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Maybe he does know things and he's like, it's not even worth it.
His brother's incredibly smart and very wealthy and doesn't care about religion.
Well,
he's got a PhD. His wife's got a PhD. He lives in San Francisco. Married a gal from Holland. He doesn't care.
Yeah, like I said, he might not even care anymore. He may have just moved on with his life, and that's fine. And you know what I mean? It shouldn't be an issue if you don't move on and you say, here's the issues in this religion. Here are the problems. Just FYI, throwing this out here, so that people can be warned, people can know, and then do with that information what you will. But you made a really good point when I talked to you last time. You said, a lot of these guys, it seems like they just reiterate the same stuff. Yeah, the same arguments still stand. The same arguments have been around for a long time.
It almost sounds like, though, they're
well,
it's like they're just reciting each other's things that they copy-pasted all over the place. I've heard the same exact, it's almost verbatim, like...
the issues with the 1914, all of the weird stuff that the organization taught through the 40s and 30s, 40s, and 50s, and like, the Jehovah's Kingdom is on Orion's belt, and if you sleep facing north, it'll help with cancer, and like all this crazy stuff. Yes.
I've never heard of this stuff.
Yeah, of course you haven't. There's a good reason why you haven't heard of it, Fred. It's called disfellowshipping and labeling people apostates.
No, I mean, it's just that not a whole lot of people, I think, that have
Not a whole lot of people
brought that up. Orion's belt, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that was some of the weirder things that they taught. They also taught that vaccines were from they were a conspiracy from the devil. They taught that germs didn't transmit disease. Like they taught a whole bunch of weird stuff. And so and you look through the organization's history, and it's these like you have to read like the finished mystery or any of the studies in the scriptures. Just go back and read that stuff. And then when you hear the organization talk about their long history of providing spiritual food, you just kind of like laugh, because you're like, it's a long history of something, but I wouldn't call it good. And you know what? If you call it good for you, and you can be part of the religion. But
I call it growth. As times change and they learn more and more and more, and they research more and more things come to light, I call it growth.
Then let other people grow too. If I research more and more and I realize that what's currently being taught isn't true, let me leave. Well, without taking my family away.
Yeah, it did.
And I've basically had to take a vow of silence. Naomi has been repeatedly cornered at work. She's quit the job now, but several witnesses have come in there and talked to her and asked her questions, and she's put in a position where, what is she supposed to say? Oh, I left because of the Australian Royal Commission, because of child abuse, because of all. I mean, Naomi has her own reasons for leaving, and I'm not speaking for her, but I'm just using that as an example. What is she supposed to do? You're asking people to stay silent. I've had several people come and talk to me, people that I felt really bad about because I knew that they were grieving the fact that I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And what am I supposed to say? Sorry, it isn't true, and here's why. I don't know. It's just, I literally spent my whole life feeling that there was something off and not knowing what it was, and then all of a sudden it was like, here it is. It made sense. All of a sudden everything made sense.
It's funny, because
like
Fred
I said,
spent his whole young life living like something was off, and then he became a witness, and it all made sense.
But
isn't that interesting? He grew up a Catholic, Joey.
But here's the thing: is that I get where the witness theology is appealing. There's plenty in there that I think can be proven. I mean, the 1914 doctrine is pretty much the only one that really matters. But I mean, you have like claiming that only the 144,000 are born again, and that's adopted as God's children and all of that stuff. That's not in the Bible. That's a really arbitrary thing. They get that from the fact that the 144,000 are Jews, and if you're adopted as Israelite, you must be a Jew, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? But they completely ignore the symbolism in Revelation. Not to mention the fact that, as I've done research, I've realized how the books of the Bible were chosen and how they were introduced into the Bible, and the very, very poor, sourcing we have as to who wrote them and when, and, I mean, for me, I told you this before, and this is really
you're just going in general about not believing in the Bible.
Yeah, now I'm just going in general. I'm talking about Revelation. Even if you do believe in the Bible, I have a hard time believing that Revelation was an act, should even have been chosen to be in the Bible.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, I've studied more the last few years than, and I studied a lot when I was in, so I hope that says a lot. But I have studied a lot when it comes to the Bible, when it comes to the reliability of the scriptures, and I feel like there's a lot that the organization not just either takes for granted or just outright lies about. And so, but that's the thing, is that's for me. I don't believe, Raymond Franz, he was a Christian all the way up until his death. So there's plenty of people who leave and are still Bible-believing Christians. There's some people who believe and are atheists, Buddhists, whatever they choose when they leave. I mean, right now the girl that I'm dating, she believes in God and she leans more towards Christianity, and her and I disagree on that, but we have a very civil, we talk about it, talk openly about the reasons why we believe what we believe or don't believe, and it's really not an issue, and it shouldn't have to be. And I feel like the organization makes it into this huge issue, and for me, the obvious reason that is because they know how easily some of their doctrines are to disprove, some of the ones that are actually important. Because, like, you have the Trinity. It's like, okay, that might be false. Okay, I have a really hard time believing that the creator of the universe, when everything's said and done, is going to set you in front of him and go, oof, you were mistaken about, I suppose some of those scriptures were a little ambiguous, but, you were a good person, you lived a great life, you were a Christian, but you just were off on this one thing, so dead. And that's what the organization puts forth, is that's the end for all of these people who are decent people who simply have a few things wrong. And of course, if the organization has things wrong, Jehovah will forgive them, because he's all forgiving when it comes to the mistakes the organization makes. And we'll find out we'll find out a bunch of things in the New Order, and we'll find out that maybe we were wrong about a few things. It's like, what about other religions? They'll find, why can't you say the same thing for them? That in the end they'll find out that they were wrong about a few things, but in general, they lived a good life. They were Christians. They followed the Bible. I mean, that was one of the hardest things for me, is I was a pioneer for a really long time, and going to people's doors and seeing how devoted people were, seeing how they knew the scriptures better than almost anybody else that I knew in the hall. They didn't even have to look at anything. They could just quote it and open the Bible right to it. And in my mind, I'm looking at these people going, yeah, God's really going to murder this person because they're wrong about this one thing. It's.
But at the same time, 90% of the people that you ran into that knew the Bible that well and disagreed with you were oftentimes vehemently believing that you were wrong.
Some of them, yeah, but I was also vehemently believing that they were wrong, and I've seen it both ways, where everybody's arguing over things that I think are pointless. I mean, I suppose the concept of hell is probably the one that's pretty important as to whether or not that's true or not. But the Trinity, immortality of the soul, things like that, it's really not. I mean, when all is said and done, I have a really hard time picturing a God looking at people and going, wow, that you were wrong about the fact that you were going to live on in this way. And in reality, you're going to live on in this way. That, not who cares, but that's, I wouldn't murder somebody over that. I certainly hope that a divine being wouldn't murder someone over that. And that's the other thing, is that there's plenty of things that I think the organization has wrong, that they just, like I said, they completely sidestep the being born again and what that means. And, I think that was supposed to apply to all Christians. All Christians were supposed to be born again. They're supposed to be adopted as God's children. And they were all supposed to receive, they were supposed to be transformed or whatever and receiving glory. And, in Revelation, I think at best what you could say is that the 144,000 are the ones that are supposed to be ruling as kings and priests. They received that specific thing before everyone else. They receive that honor, but everyone else is going to be resurrected too. And there's really no reason not to believe that, other than, that teaching was made in the 30s when the organization taught that only 144,000 were, making it, and then they had to change it, and then they came up with the other sheep. It's another thing that I disagree with. I think that when Jesus was talking about other sheep, he's talking about Gentiles. I think that was pretty obvious, that, when he was saying, I have sheep that are not of this fold, and they will also he was talking about the Gentiles. He made very clear that his ministry on earth was to address the Jews, and those were his sheep, and eventually those other sheep were joined when it was opened up when Peter saw the vision and it was opened up for the Gentiles to join Christianity. Then you have the other sheep. But you have this, anyway. So there's a lot of things that I think can, like, in the Bible that can be proved, like, even if I don't believe it, I think you can have an accurate understanding of what the author's intentions were. And so that's where I disagree as far as biblically. I have a lot of biblical disagreements. And there's very few things, if any, that I disagree with that I can't point to the scriptures and say this is why I disagree with it. Because not only do I think it's immoral, but I think that it's not in the Bible. So, sorry, I ranted and raved and...
Well, we're almost up to the 2.5 hours that we had the other night with the chocolate. So we want to beat our record and go longer, or should we cut it off?
I haven't eaten anything.
You went
for
from
supper and yeah.
I should actually probably get going too, because I still have to work up at Customs tonight.
Okay.
So I have to go clean.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you came in and visited with us, Joey.
I hope you're wrong, because I really hope there's a purpose in life and that there is a future for mankind.
I'm not an atheist because I think it's great. I mean, there are plenty of atheists that wish there was a God. I guess I don't know if I would fall into that category. I would like to believe that, I would like to live on, but at the moment I really don't see any good evidence for there being a God or a creator. But I'm also 100% willing to be proven wrong, and I would actually like to be proven wrong. But, based on the evidence...
So how do you think we came about?
Well,
briefly?
Briefly?
Monkeys, basically?
Yeah,
okay.
Evolution.
Yeah.
I think evolution is a pretty well-established scientific fact. I mean, you
Even
can...
though most scientists who really look into it will tell you that it's almost impossible for the RNA and the complicated amino acids.
So you're talking about something else. You're talking about a biogenesis. So, like, biogenesis is how life started. Evolution is how the species on this planet came about.
But
so
the two are in...
Not necessarily. You can have a God and still have evolution. Like, evolution doesn't disprove God.
Right,
like
but you're saying you don't believe there is a God, so...
But here's the thing, is that a lot
life
of...
was an accident that kept accidentally reproducing until it got a foothold and...
Well, I don't know if you'd call it an accident, but yeah. I mean, essentially...
Well, how could it not be an accident?
I mean, you can... We use...
set it into motion.
Yeah, we use the term accident, but yes, okay. It was, we already know...
Incidental.
Yeah, incidental.
Incidental incident.
I mean, from what I've seen, as far as what scientists have found in that field of study, in abiogenesis, I do believe that it is possible. But quite frankly, I'm willing to say I don't know, and that's feel like.
Did you just say that?
This has nothing to do with but my curiosity.
But that's the thing, is that I'm willing to not have that answer. And I'm willing to say I don't know, and I don't need to make up an answer that makes me feel good in order to fill in the blanks. I'm going to wait on the evidence before I just say God did it, or something else did it, or aliens did it, or anything. I'm going to wait on the evidence before I just make that assumption.
I had a conversation with a biology professor a couple times, and he admitted this to me, and I'll share it with you. And I asked him specifically, and this wasn't a religious discussion. This is when I was in school. And I asked him specifically, I said, in the fossil record, I said, with evolution, I said, with all the different species that we have on the earth, I said, and I'm not talking about showing me the head of a human that And he's agreed with me with these things I'm mentioning to him. Don't show me the head of a human and tell me it's half monkey, half some missing link in the evolutionary chain, when it could very likely be an extinct tribe of individuals, right? So we've got all these different shapes and sizes of people. He admitted that the carbon dating isn't an exact science. He's like, carbon dating, he said, is not an exact science. He said, when we say something is 10 million years old, he said, we're willing to accept the fact that we could be off a million years, or 8 million, 9 million years. He said, there's not an exact fact because nothing's been around. He says, we can't prove that this thing here is 10 million years old so that we can date the decay and carbon date it and compare it relative to this thing that we dug up and say, okay, now this is halfway to this point. It says, somewhere along the line, someone picked something up and said, well, it decays this fast. And we don't know if that accelerates over time. We don't know if it slows down over time. We might be wrong the other way. The thing might be 20 million years old. So he had this open philosophy, like, we could be wrong this way or we could be wrong this way. We don't know. Because we don't have a reference point to be like, well, we know that this is exactly this.
I mean,
no one was around to be like,
carbon dating only goes back 50,000 years, but radiometric dating is what they use to judge the rocks and to figure that out.
We're talking about living tissue. So he's like, we can be wrong one way, this way, or we can be wrong this way.
And that margin for error has been closing considerably as they dig up ice cores, as they compare tree rings, as they compare several different lines of evidence to find out what the conditions were on Earth at any given time, and then cross-reference that with the amount of, or where in the rocks something was found, and then the amount of carbon it has in its body.
I told him, I said, show me in the fossil record, I said, right now what the fossil record shows, if you believe in evolution, is the fossil record shows we went from here to here. So you have to believe in, what's the terminology for it? The type of evolution, I can't remember the name
I'm
of it.
assuming you're talking about the Cambrian explosion.
Well, no.
Okay.
No, that's just the
He's
theory.
talking about the fact that the fossil record tends to show
Jumps.
Huge
Jumps in evolution. It doesn't show like a slow progression.
Well, I mean, and also finding like something being fossilized is actually incredibly rare.
Yeah.
I mean, DNA was probably the nail in the coffin that proved evolution true. But as far as the fossil record, the fossils that we do have, I feel prove pretty conclusively that you have perfect example. I think whale evolution is probably a really great example.
But see, we have these large sections of this, right? So we have this point in time, and then we have these large sections of this. We have nothing in here, and you go to the next one, and it's the same thing. So until someone shows me even one or two pieces from in this middle range.
I mean, that's the thing, is that you do have a few examples. Like I said, whale evolution is probably the best example. You have examples of, like, you can see the progressing of the nose hole up the head, and then you can also see the change in the inner ear to deal with water pressure and stuff. And that's over, however many thousand years. But what I was going to say is that the process of evolution is still happening. We still observe creatures changing in response to their environment. We still observe speciation, where creatures change to the point where they can no longer interbreed. And we see changes that are so drastic that the two species no longer look like one another. So we see that right now. The problem that I see with a lot of people who think that evolution disproves God or whatever is that when you project that over millions of years and say, yes, these changes happen this way, and they've always happened that way, and this is where we're at. Whether you believe that God has been guiding that process, for me, if I look at the fossil record and I look at the DNA and everything, what you would have to believe, in my opinion, since 99% of the species that we've ever found no longer exist, you have to believe that what God did was he created something, let it exist for a little while, destroyed it, and replaced it with something that was just a little bit different from it. And he did that again and again and again and again. And he kept replacing it with things that are just a little bit different from each other. And you're right, some species we have better evidence for evolution than others because fossilization is extremely rare. When Darwin wrote his book, that's what he said, is that would probably be the number one objection, is the fact that fossilization is extremely rare, so the evidence is going to be extremely difficult to find. And it's been going on for like 150 years or whatever, and they keep finding more evidence, and the intermediate stages, are slowly but surely being found. But I mean, evolution offers the ability to make predictions. They were able to say, okay, we have these types of species here, these footed creatures here, and we have fish here, so in these rocks we should find intermediates. And sure enough, they go and dig in those rocks and they find intermediates. And so you ask yourself, okay, well, evolution is able to make those types of predictions. It's able to see, they're able to say this is what we should expect and this is what we expect. And yeah, it's a random process, so it's creatures responding to their environment. It's changes in gene frequency and allele frequency and mutations and all those things. And then over time, you have changes that build up over time to the point where a creature is different than it was before. I mean, if you take two different species or you take one species and you put it in two different environments, it's going to respond to those two environments. And if you separate them for thousands of years or millions of years, those changes are going to eventually make it so that those two species are almost unrecognizable. I mean, you like deer and, you have like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a decent example. Deer and you have giraffes and things like that, things that, several creatures that obviously share a common ancestry, but their paths have diverged over time. That's how I view. I mean, that is technically the definition of evolution, as two different groups responding to their environments, and those changes eventually build up to the point where you have two different species, and then beyond that, the changes just increase. So, I mean, like I said, we can still see that today, and we can go in and look at the DNA and see what the last genes that were turned off were. So scientists have gone in and turned on the last genes that were in chickens, and they have webbed feet and teeth. And humans, I mean, no surprise there, our latest genes were full body, covered in fur. And don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure a tail was also one of the last genes shut off, but I'd have to look into that. But I do know that one of the last genes shut off was hair. Also, you have the fact that you have 8 species that we examine, and the fact that we know that we're related because our DNA and our chromosomes, they were able to see how our chromosomes, I think it was human chromosome 2, you can see a fusion point in there where humans went from 48 to 46 chromosomes. So, I mean, we know that we used to have 46 chromosomes or 48 chromosomes, and now we have 46 because of that fusion, and that matches with, gorillas and things like that. I mean, I look at apes, I look at all those creatures, and it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously we've diverged we share a common ancestry, and that, and we've, entered into different environments, we've developed over the years, humans developed much more intelligence. The prefrontal cortex was developed a lot more in our species than it was in others. That enabled us to survive. But I mean, that's how I view it. But the thing of it is like I said, evolution does not disprove the existence of God. I'm pretty sure 99% of scientists believe in evolution, and 40-some% still believe in God. So it says nothing as to whether or not there's a God or not, if evolution is true. And as far as abiogenesis, I'm willing to say I don't know. I'm willing to say I do not know I mean, I'm leaning more towards the fact that, you know, it was probably a spontaneous, you know, event. It was you know, due to chemical reaction. Well, you'd have to do a little bit of research into it, but like the development of proto cells and stuff like that are enough to convince me that it's possible. But like I said, there's no proof for that, so I'm willing to say I don't know. So I don't know how we came into existence. I do believe in evolution. I don't believe that disproves God, and I'm open to evidence that there is a God. Like I told you before, and this kind of summed up my feelings, I don't believe in the Bible because I can't prove it's true, and I don't feel like there's any evidence to prove that it's true. I don't believe in this particular religion because I can prove that it's false. And so that's where I'm at. So that sums up everything, I think. Sorry that I wasted so much of your
You're
time.
5 minutes short from the other night, so you're getting out of here.
Yeah,
Once you get out, 5
yeah,
minutes.
yeah,
Don't make it beat the record.
beat my record of.
2.5 hours of the waitress giving us the stink eye,
Yeah.
taking up a table.
I'm glad it wasn't somebody that I know. I know a few people that work there, and like, ugh, I would hate for them to be like, get out of here, Joe.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for meeting with
Yeah,
us,
thanks for
Joey.
coming in again.
thank you for meeting with me, and thank you for letting me rant. And I'm sure it probably answered a lot of questions that you guys had. Probably filled in a little bit of blanks.
Right, I know you've done a lot of research and believe that you've found answers.
I mean, yeah, I do. I mean, that's the only way to put it is yes. I do believe that I found answers, and it's sad that it took me as long as it did, and I wish I had have found those answers before before I was baptized. That would have changed probably a lot of things, but there's no way to, change that now. But
Okay. Thanks for coming.
thanks for meeting with me.